Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. We'll be talking about power plants and land, says US President Donald Trump ahead of his phone call with Russia's Vladimir Putin. What will be the shape of a peace deal for Ukraine and how may it affect Europe's security? More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Ukraine appoints Andriy Hnatov as new Chief General Staff. Russian intelligence is responsible for the series of last year's arson attacks in Europe. And how many eggs can you send? US asks European countries to help lower soaring prices. Donald Trump's remarks on power plants and land in Ukraine ahead of his phone call with Russia's Vladimir Putin have raised fears that the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the biggest plant in Europe, will belong to Russia after a peace deal is reached. Michael van Blomenstein investigates what would it mean for Kiev and the continent's energy security.
This is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Seized by Russian forces during the first days of the full-scale invasion, the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains worrisome. Recent comments by US President Donald Trump, in which he suggests the ownership of the facility is on the negotiation table, are casting even more doubts around the future of the facility.
There's a power plant involved, a very big power plant involved. Who's going to get the power plant and who's going to get this and that? And so, it's not an easy process.
Holding 6 of the country's 15 working reactors, the Zaporizhzhia power plant was by far the largest single provider of power in Ukraine before the war, producing around 23% of all electricity generated. The United States adding this to the negotiation table does not help Ukraine in the slightest.
Any sort of question about, ceding the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the Russian Federation would be a very, very bad idea.
Handing permanent control of the Zaporizhzhia power plant to Moscow would be more about denying Ukraine energy security rather than giving Russia additional resources, says Benjamin Schmidt, a former European energy security advisor at the US Department of State.
The idea that Russia would then, quote-unquote, get the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, that would only increase the future energy security or in this case, energy poverty potential that would threaten Ukraine's economic and energy well-being in the future.
One expert from a Ukrainian energy think tank also points to Russia's questionable management of the facility.
We have reports of International Atomic Energy Agency on complicated conditions for the employees, of the lack of proper maintenance, lack of qualified personnel, constant shelling, constant disruption of power supply.
And there are also obvious risks to a nuclear power plant being in an active war zone, which Russia has consistently exploited for their own gains, including using it for equipment storage and housing troops.
They are using their presence as kind of a shield, because they know that Ukrainian military respect international humanitarian law, and they could not, fire in response.
The first talks between Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin on Tuesday will show how much weight Washington gives to the energy security of Ukraine.
As the operation in the Russian Kursk region seems to be coming to an end amid the accusations of the army commander's incompetence, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has decided to replace the head of the General Staff. The new chief of the General Staff is Major General Andriy Hnatov, a highly valued field commander. Alexandra Marchewicz has this report.
On March 16th, Ukraine's General Staff acknowledged that Ukrainian troops had pulled back from Sudza, a key entry point in Russia's Kursk region. Meanwhile, unverified online reports suggested Ukrainian units might be encircled, prompting US President Donald Trump on March 14th to call on Russian President Vladimir Putin to spare these allegedly surrounded forces. Ukraine, however, has dismissed these claims as disinformation. In parallel with the Sudza withdrawal news, Zelenskyy appointed Major General Andriy Hnatov as the new chief of the General Staff on March 16th, part of a broader military reform effort.
We decided that Andriy Hnatov will be the new chief of the General Staff. He is a combat guy, and his task is to bring more combat experience, the experience of our brigades in planning operations, defensive and offensive, as well as more active development of the corps system.
Hnatov brings 27 years of service to the position, having commanded a Marine Brigade, the Operational Command East Formation, and the Joint Forces of Ukraine's armed forces. The 45-year-old was responsible for adapting Kyiv military to NATO standards, and during the invasion, he also led the defense of Bakhmut. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov emphasized that this appointment was made following his recommendation, and he stressed the importance of restructuring the command system and implementing clear standards as part of Ukraine's ongoing military reform. During an interview with TVP World, Kyiv Post editor-in-chief Bogdan Nahailo suggested the reasons for the change remain somewhat unclear.
It's unclear why the change occurred. The official reason is for operational reasons, for efficacy. I can't give you that answer because it hasn't been disclosed, not only for military reasons, perhaps for internal political reasons. We remember how Zelenskyy was removed, the commander of the Ukrainian forces.
General Valery Zelenskyy was also replaced without any direct blame for failure, although Zelenskyy had been a prominent face of Ukraine's struggle against Russia, with an 88% approval rating, surpassing even Zelensky's 62%. Yet he too was quietly moved aside. Whatever the true motives behind the change, this new leadership shift highlights the fluid nature of Ukraine's top military command.
The replacement of Ukraine's chief of the General Staff comes in the aftermath of Kyiv's troops withdrawing from the Russian city of Sudzha. And so we're going now live to our Ukraine correspondent, Os Katerji. Good evening, Os. What is the current situation in the Kursk region and the rest of the front line?
Well, the Ukrainians are still said to be in part of the Kursk region, but they have withdrawn from Sudzha. I'd say Sudzha is more of a town. I was in Sudzha with a Ukrainian unit a few months ago, viewing the area. Yeah, it's more of a town. It's been heavily damaged by the fighting between Russia and Ukraine. It was quite a strategically important town because it housed a gas metering station that was the last entry point from Russia into Ukraine for a gas pipeline into Europe. Now, that gas pipeline has been turned off since the beginning of the year, so it has lost its strategic value, but the political value of this occupation was important for the Ukrainians moving forward in any negotiations with Russia. They could say, we will give you back this territory if you give us back this territory. This is much more difficult for Ukraine now, having lost significant ground in the Kursk region, with the Russians having pushed for several weeks using North Korean troops to try and push the Ukrainians out by cutting the supply lines into Sudzha. They managed to push the Ukrainians out of it. They are still wedged into part of Kursk, but a much, much smaller salient than the one they'd managed to push into Russian territory in August 2024. The situation remains difficult there, but it's unclear how long the Ukrainians are going to be able to hang on to that land, if indeed they are planning on to hang on to it at all. There is still heavy fighting across the country. Russians claiming some advances in the south near Zaporizhzhia today as well, but the Ukrainians are denying this. In either case, the situation is incredibly difficult across the front line in the Russian part and in the Ukrainian part. So the Ukrainians really, this shake-up of military staff at the top of the Ukrainian armed forces comes at a time when the Ukrainian forces are under serious pressure in large parts of the front line. Back to you in the studio, Maciej.
That was Os Katerji reporting from Kyiv. Thank you, Os, and stay safe. The presidential campaign in Poland is gaining momentum as the May vote draws closer. The latest survey brings a surprise as the support for the main opposition candidate has just dropped below 20%. Chief political correspondent Aaron Damon has the latest from the race for the presidential palace in Warsaw.
This is the centrist frontrunner in Poland's presidential battle, Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski. And we need to do absolutely everything to convince President Trump's administration to behave predictably, to explain the rationale, above all to explain that if Putin, God forbid, were to win this war, that both the security of Europe but also the security of the United States would stand to lose.
Trzaskowski is running on the same foreign policy platform as Prime Minister Donald Tusk, a pro-Ukrainian Poland with deep European ties and a strong transatlantic relationship. He's also the governing coalition's only real hope to end Tusk's ongoing cohabitation with current President Andrzej Duda, who cannot be re-elected after 2 terms in office.
I never thought I would say this, but I ask you very much not to make us miss Andrzej Duda.
That's Trzaskowski appearing to take a dig at his competitors, including Karol Nawrocki, who's backed by the opposition right-wing Law and Justice Party. Nawrocki, a historian and Eurosceptic with little political experience, has embraced the rebellion against the old world order while tapping into growing anti-Ukrainian discontent.
This will be a referendum on Donald Tusk's government. When you vote for Trzaskowski, you are voting for Tusk. When you vote for Nawrocki, you vote against Tusk.
But Nawrocki is struggling to gain traction, and in recent days his campaign has drawn criticism after posts shared by at least 2 Law and Justice MPs. Why? Because according to analysis conducted by TVP World, these photos are highly likely to be fake images generated by artificial intelligence. There's no suggestion Nawrocki's campaign signed off on the posts.
I do believe that if you try to make a claim that you're supported by the people, it's not a very good strategy to have to create them on the internet through the artificial intelligence.
The Civic Coalition has also previously been reported as using AI for social media ahead of the last general election. But this comes as pressure mounts on Nawrocki, while Sławomir Mencen of the far-right Confederation makes inroads with younger voters as he echoes Russian narratives.
A Pole in Poland to get treatment at a doctor is to pay health premium, and the Ukrainian doesn't have to. They have organized medical tourism for themselves with our money.
Although Trzaskowski remains the frontrunner, Mencen has already once surpassed Nawrocki in the polls, and in a more recent count on Monday, the pair were neck and neck within the margin of error.
So it is not very clear if what we're saying is for real or is it just because of the immense popularity of Mr. Mencen on social media.
The race to second place is critical because as long as no candidate gets a majority on May 18, voters will go to the polls again in a final runoff on the 1st of June. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
According to Lithuanian prosecutors, the person responsible for an arson attack on a furniture store in Vilnius in May last year is also the one who put ablaze the biggest Polish shopping centre in Warsaw the very same month. Investigators believe the whole operation was ordered by the Kremlin. Evgeny Rusakov reports from Vilnius.
A press conference was held in Vilnius on Monday, during which the chief prosecutor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Investigation Department of the Prosecutor-General's office, Arturas Urbelis, revealed details of an arson attack on one of the shopping centers in Vilnius. The evidence contained in the pre-trial investigation material gives reasonable grounds to believe that the offenses were committed by a Ukrainian national who acted in the interests of the Russian military structures and security services in a pre-established organized terrorist group with the aim of committing terrorist crimes in Lithuania and Latvia, together with other persons who are under separate pre-trial investigation.
The discovery and suspicion that these criminal acts and their organizers are linked to the Russian special services, military structures or other security units.
According to a Lithuanian official, the suspect is accused of 3 offences: committing a terrorist act, training for terrorist purposes, and illegal possession of explosives. He also specified that during the pre-trial investigation, it was established that the immediate perpetrators were 2 persons under the age of 20. One of the accused is currently detained in Poland, and law enforcement authorities in both countries are cooperating and coordinating their actions.
Both perpetrators are citizens of Ukraine. One of them is currently detained in Poland, and the process of transferring part of the case, namely to Polish colleagues, is also underway.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also commented on the case on his X account, saying that the investigation of the Lithuanian prosecutor's office has confirmed suspicions that Russian secret services are responsible for setting fires to shopping centers in Vilnius and Warsaw. Straight from Vilnius, Evgeny Rusakov for TVP World.
Germany's lawmakers are to make a choice which may change the future of Europe. Tomorrow, the Bundestag will hold a vote on amending the constitution in order to exempt defense and infrastructure spending from strict debt limitation procedures. This could release up to 1 trillion euros for new investments. So we're joined now by our correspondent in Berlin, Ovidiusz Nicieja. Good evening, Ovidiusz. So how will the MPs vote on Tuesday?
Some of Germany's biggest political parties want to increase military spending so that in this time of uncertainty, the German military can be a tangible force in Europe. But there is one big obstacle in the way of that, namely the Schuldenbremse, or the debt brake, which is enshrined in the German constitution and which limits the amount of money that Germany as a state can borrow. So 3 political parties, the Christian Democratic Union, the Social Democrats, and the Greens, have struck an agreement last week to soften the debt brake and to make exemptions from it, to exempt defense spending and infrastructure spending from the debt brake. And if tomorrow the vote gets the required 2/3 of approval in the German parliament, it could activate a whopping sum of 1 trillion euros for new investments over the coming decade. This would also be good news for Ukraine, as according to the agreement reached last week, military aid for countries illegally invaded by others would also be exempted from the debt brake. Maciej, back to you.
That was Ovidiusz Nicieja reporting from Berlin ahead of tomorrow's pivotal vote in the Bundestag. Thank you very much, Ovidiusz. The United States has reached out to Denmark and other European nations asking if they can export eggs, as Americans face surging prices of the product. Despite Donald Trump's campaign promises to bring the prices down, the very opposite has happened, thus becoming a serious thorn in the politicians' side. Sonia Gatabyszczan has this report.
Easter seems to have come early for the United States President Donald Trump, as he's on an egg hunt. What's more, in pursuit of eggs, he decided to court a country that he's been having tensions with lately.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
After expressing his ambitions for Greenland, Denmark's self-governing territory, Trump is now requesting eggs from the Commonwealth. The reason behind the request seems to be the bird flu, which caused a shortage of eggs and rising prices.
But I will tell you what is smart. When I took it over, eggs were through the roof, and now eggs are down 35% over a short period of time.
Trump blamed his predecessor Joe Biden for the sky-high egg prices, but the data points to the current U.S. president taking the crown, as prices continued to rise even in February following Trump's inauguration. Currently, egg prices in the U.S. are so high that there have been attempts to smuggle them from Mexico and Canada, begging the question, will Denmark come to the rescue?
It depends on the condition and if we have any to export. Right now, there is a shortage of eggs in the whole Europe, but of course, we'll try to help our American friends if possible.
However, Larson added that the European supply is unlikely to resolve the U.S. shortage, given its sheer magnitude. The U.S. has also requested eggs from other countries. Finland was reportedly among the first to reject the request due to a lack of market access negotiations with Washington and the absence of national approval to export eggs to the U.S.
Power plants and land are on the agenda of Donald Trump's phone call with Vladimir Putin. What will Ukraine look like after a peace deal is struck? Is Europe ready for it? And is the Kremlin willing to sign it at all? To discuss it and more, we're joined by Diane Francis, political analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So first of all, what do you expect from the Trump-Putin call? Do you think that a general consensus has already been reached and the both leaders are only there to announce it, or will the negotiations continue?
Well, you know, there's a lot of disinformation that's flying around online. For instance, there's information that, the Ukrainian army in Kursk is about to be crushed. Apparently not true. There's information that Witkoff, Trump's negotiator, was left standing and never met with Putin in Moscow. He was stood up by Putin. Who knows whether that's true? And now we have Trump saying, good news, we're working quickly. We're going to come up with a negotiation arrangement soon. Of course, all of that I'll believe it when I see it. And, Trump knows the kind of position of Europe and Ukraine. Security guarantees are essential. This business of power plants is a new one. You've got a power plant in Kursk that's no longer surrounded by Ukrainians, but you've got one in Zaporizhzhia and Chernobyl that are surrounded by Russians. I don't know what he's playing at here. Is this a form of hostage taking that he's trying to scare the Americans into giving up too much, or what? So, we're sort of in chaos here, and I really, really don't think there's any credible noises coming out of the Russians or the Americans at this point.
So if the negotiations are to continue, indeed. Now, Donald Trump, during the last meeting in the Oval Office with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has told the latter that, quote, you have no cards, right? So I'm wondering what cards does the US have to play this game with Russia? And I'm also wondering whether Vladimir Putin is attempting to play Donald Trump as well.
Well, the Russians what we do understand is that the Russians and Americans who have been sitting down talking about this truce and have been stringing along Trump with promises that they will help him deal with Iran and its nuclear ambitions and help him isolate or control China. If he's believing that, then he's really, very naive. Obviously, Russia's two greatest allies are Iran, who supply weapons, and China, who supplies technology and buys all of its oil. So, he's hardly going to double cross them. And that seems to be the whispering going on into Trump's ear to get him to not be as vigorous. Trump has all the cards because he can flood Ukraine with weapons to make Russia's life more miserable. And he can also double or triple the sanctions against Russians, companies, oligarchs to make their life more miserable, put oil caps on, intervene with oil transfers by ship, and so on. He's got a lot more cards than Putin has at this point. He doesn't seem inclined to use them or even threaten them. So we're going to have to see what happens. I think that so far the Russians have got the better of him.
Right. So Donald Trump is putting pressure on the Kremlin. But are there any signs indicating that Russia, in fact, wants to end this war?
Russia has always been in the position of being able to end this war since 2022 when it invaded Ukraine. It could have stopped at any time. Could have said, okay, we want peace, we're ending this. They don't. They haven't. They still haven't. And so right now they're playing a game of trying to stall it out so they can hopefully gain more territory. And we see that this has already worked because it looks like they've regained some of the Kursk. And this is just a strategy to when they finally decide they want to end it, that they will have gotten as much territory from Ukraine as they possibly could have.
Now, the Europeans are scrambling to help the situation. Now, how successful do you think will be this so-called coalition of willing, and will they play any part in these post-war architecture that we'll have in Ukraine?
Well, it's essential that they're there, and it's also essential that Ukraine still has an army. Putin doesn't want either. And the Americans are not willing to put boots on the ground. And so, there is no peace, and there is no peace at all if there isn't a means by which Ukraine can protect itself from, yet another invasion by Putin. This is his second. His ceasefire lapses are in the dozens. He doesn't listen to ceasefires. And, the question is, even if he finally says, okay, we'll do a 30-day ceasefire, who's going to enforce it? Are the Americans going to enforce it? What if somebody breaches the ceasefire? So there's none of this that's been disclosed. And it's very kind of odd, the whole thing. And Trump badly wants this to end, which is a good thing. I think we all do. However, it's all very fuzzy. It's very strange. And he has more cards than Putin, but he hasn't been threatening them lately. And he's got to whack them with sanctions. The other thing, too, is Europe. Europe's got to put together the coalition of the willing. But, Europe is still buying oil and gas from Russia, has been through the whole war. I mean, that's treason. That should never have been allowed. That should have been stopped. And it wasn't. So, I don't think anybody except Ukraine has behaved virtuously.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andriy Hnatov is the new head of Ukraine's general staff. Now, this comes amidst reports of a collapse of the Kursk operation, despite many different reports. Now, is this decision, in your opinion, purely politically motivated? We remember what happened to General Zaluzhny, and was it intended to find a scapegoat for the failure of this whole Kursk incursion?
It's odd timing, given the situation right now. So I don't have deep sources inside the military. All I know is that the Ukrainian military is exceptionally professional and exceptionally talented. It's probably the best armed forces in the world right now in terms of digital and drone technology. I mean, they run circles around everybody. Their problem is manpower and shortage of ammunition. It could be political. I doubt it. And their bench, to use a hockey term, the bench is strong, meaning there's not all the players are on the ice, but the ones that are sitting on the bench ready to go on the ice are just as good as the ones on the ice. And so that's sort of my opinion. But you wouldn't make a change like this unless there was something absolutely necessary. And it's not because of any failure in Kursk, I don't think.
And lastly, something else, although very much connected. U.S. President Donald Trump has cut the U.S. Agency for Global Media to the bare minimum funding levels required by law, thus depriving several hundred of people of their jobs. I'm talking specifically about Voice of America and Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty. Now, what's your take on that?
Well, Voice of America and Radio Liberty, I think, have probably served the purpose they needed to in years past, and they were very important, and they were a beacon of light, and it was critical to get information on the other side of the Iron Curtain or the Bamboo Curtain or whatever, and we know that was very valiant and very gallant and very wonderful. Now, I would argue that with the internet, with cryptically protected means, whether it's WhatsApp or Signal, that people have access to now, or the social media, you know, there's really very little that is hidden from the world now because everybody's online. The other thing that's really important to remember as well is that, you know, Google years ago started to translate everything. So language barriers are no longer a problem for people around the world. And so I'm not saying they've lost their usefulness, but, and there's another issue too, that these particular not-for-profit organizations were run by people, I would guess, who are mostly not Trump supporters. They're a left of center, they're very liberal, and that sort of thing. So it could have been a little bit of, well, we'll get rid of you because you haven't been loyal. Number two, if that is the case, and I think it is to a certain extent, that's really not a good news outlet, because you want unbiased information, just facts and figures. So I would say now that with the huge amount of digital availability worldwide in any language whatsoever, the need for a specific beacon of light from America to tell everybody what's going on is no longer necessary. Although I think that, you know, we should pay homage to the great work that was done in the past.
Diane Francis, political analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and a well-renowned and world-renowned journalist as well was our guest tonight. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.